Mia Harpy here, and I just want to make this video about my worries for the future villains of Final Fantasy XIV. Now, this will have Endwalker spoilers, so if you haven't finished 6.0, I do suggest finishing up on it before watching this video. Before I begin, I want to go ahead and say I'm a bit of a story critic, and when something is off or wrong, I tend to notice and point it out. I do this even with stories I generally love, Final Fantasy XIV included. So, I'll just go ahead and say this right off the bat. Story-wise, Azim is probably one of the most powerful beings in the game's universe, and in terms of writing a good villain, that can be an issue. Now, why would I say this? Well, it's based on what we learned in Endwalker when Mentian discovers that most, if not all, civilizations on other planets are either destroyed or in total despair and slowly dying off. And then she goes off to end the suffering to the civilization still around. Of course, Azim ends up defeating Mentian, and then she uses her power to give hope to all the planets. Now, from that, we can generally tell since Mentian was almost successful in the destruction of the universe, we can guess that most of the planets either didn't know about Dynamis, and in turn didn't know Mentian was causing their destruction, they knew but didn't have any means of getting to her, or they knew and intended to stop her, but failed because they weren't strong enough, or they were already far too gone before Mentian did her thing. This means that any potential villain from other planets either died, stuck on their own planet, meaning very unlikely to interact with us, or doesn't use Dynamis, which we know how much that can backfire when Omega fought Azim. Now, not saying we can't have a villain from one of these worlds, but generally anyone who we could face won't be on the same level. And so, this mostly means if we are looking for a good villain, it will more likely be from Icarus, its reflections, or time traveling from the past. That would be generally an alright thing, but at the same time, concerning. Even though I can't say much about villains who travel from the past, I can say that if the villain is from Icarus, you'd think we'd hear talk or rumors about someone potentially dangerous by now. And for the reflections, if there is such a big villain, then that would mean that supposedly another calamity could happen. But in terms of writing, it'd be odd for one to start up again right after Shadowbringers. It would mean that the writing team will have to create a villain that could somehow pass these somewhat walls and be strong enough to be deemed as a huge threat, and that scares me. Let me just be clear. One of the things I always say is, as long as it's written well, anything can happen. So, it is possible to make good, strong villains for Final Fantasy XIV still. Though, with Endwalker, that has lowered the bar on what we could get for a good villain. I just hate to say this, but even though I love Mentian as a character, she's just not really a good villain. Out of all the villains we got, Mentian's passion and desires weren't as strong as the others. In fact, her change was very sudden and drastic. Like, I completely understand why it happened, but just understanding why it happened doesn't make it better. And you don't even see her until late in Endwalker, while previous villains you see them either extremely early in the expansion, or in the previous expansions. And she's became a villain because of Van Daniel's design of her. What happened to her wasn't really her fault. This isn't a video to hate on Mentian. I love her. It's more of the question, are the future villains going to suffer pretty much the same fate because it's getting harder to creatively make new villains for Azim to face? I believe it's always possible to write a really good villain, and I believe the writing team can do so. But will they manage to do so? I love Final Fantasy XIV, and it scares me to think about the possibility of the quality of the story dropping because of this issue. Like, they could probably do the cliche of having Azim lose some of his strength, but they pretty much already did that in The Realm Reborn, and it's not really good to repeat too many times. Not that cliches are necessarily a bad thing. Most of the iconic stories and movies has cliches, which is why it works. Well, anyways, for now, I'll just have to hope for the best. I know this is a bit of a downer, but it's something I want to get off my chest. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and feel free to comment your personal thoughts on the matter. And I hope you guys have a great day today, and see ya!